Welcome to the live stream. So if you haven't read the emails or seen some of the information we put out on it, what we're going to be doing is every month, sometime mid-month. It's not going to be the same date every month. We're going to be doing some type of live stream, and we're going to be alternating between a form check and a Q&A. And it's also going to be alternating between coaches. So next month, sometime mid-month in February, Matt Cronin is going to be doing a form check, and you can continually find the submission link to be able to submit these questions or the videos for the form check. One, in Discord, there's a chat for it. Two, we'll send out emails with submission links to be able to do that because we need to be able to hide it behind the Powerlifting Now membership because only subscribers are going to be able to submit questions or be able to submit things for the live Q&A and whatnot. So uh, after the Q&A is done, or for this Q&A, it will be available outside of the live stream on February 1st. So it'll be launching each month with our normal content the following month. It'll actually also be on YouTube as well, so you can be able to view it there, but it'll be embedded and added to Powerlifting Now and be available in the calendar, which will be somewhat revamped. We're going to be having an updated website very soon. So thank you all for joining. Quick little promo. This month we got some awesome videos. Sean has his 3 or 4 time bench setup video, which I've watched, which is fantastic. That's currently our most watched video for the month. Marcellus did a video on how to be breaking plateaus. I had a video on foot position on bench and how that affects things. Matt did one on athlete onboarding. And then Marshall, our guy who's behind the scenes, he actually did a video this month on creating some content for powerlifting coaches. If you didn't know, he does all the content creation for Powerlifting America, as well as Top Step Media, and he's fantastic at that. So for now, we'll get into it. So how this is going to be structured, this will be somewhere between 30 to 60 minutes. Obviously, a lot of you already submitted questions, and from that, I chose 9 that I thought were really, really good. There's more that were great as well, but we can't cover all of them, and we're saving those for future reference as well as the future submitted questions as well. Within these 9 questions, as I'm going through everything, feel free to continue to ask questions either on what I'm talking about or other questions. And once I'm done with all of these, we'll cover whatever's being asked in the chat for the remainder of the time up to that until 1 p.m. Central and whatnot. So the first question, and we got to kind of the two-parter here because the first and second question go hand in hand, is what should an athlete's walking weight allowance prior to a meet be? So what should their body weight be at prior to a meet? And this answer to me is very much based on what is their competitive goals. Are they trying to win national or world titles? Or are they a local level lifter? Because the fact is, the more you cut, the higher the risk, higher reward. And so it really depends on what your goals are. If you are not, this is just my opinion, but if you're not nationally or world competitive and trying to actually vie for these titles, I would try to be within 2% or less. Which, just to give a general idea of what that would be, for an average male 83 to 93 kilo class, that would be about a 2 kilo cut. So that's sitting around 85, cutting to 83, sitting around 95, cutting to 93. That would be the top end of what I would do. Just because, again, high risk, high reward. If you're doing more than that, you're going to see some type of impact probably from that cut. And if you're not competing for some type of competitive placing nationally or world in a world championship, I don't know if it's fully worth taking the hit or the risk that kind of comes associated with that. So, because just in my opinion, this is fully my opinion, if you're not vying for those titles, I think most people should probably care less about their weight class and more so just about getting stronger within a healthy and sustainable body weight. That doesn't mean just get as big as possible and get overweight for what your body frame is, but you just care mainly about getting stronger because eventually if you have the ability and you have the effort and work ethic to be competitive, you're going to get there. You're going to eventually find where you should be. But I think too many people immediately from the get-go already determine their weight class. They start trying to stay in this weight class, and it ends up kind of being somewhat of a long-term detriment. Because in my time coaching, I only have ever had anyone who didn't cut for a meet and had a great meet be disappointed they didn't cut. But I've had plenty of people who cut too much trying to force things that were disappointed with how much of a hit they took. So if you are vying for national or world titles, I think probably the upper end of what you should be doing that's probably a safe cut, not only from a health perspective, but even more so from a performance perspective, is about 3 to 4%, which that doesn't sound like a lot, but that's a pretty darn big cut. That's going to be a lot. Maybe you could even do more, but I'd argue if you need to do more than 3 to 4%, you need to buckle down nutritionally in the off season. because either one, you are just too big for the weight class enforcing it, or two, and more likely, what I see more often than not is why people are cutting 3 or 4%, or more than 3 or 4%, is because outside of meat prep, they're not on nutritionally. They let their weight get a little bit out of control, and then they've got to cut too much getting back to it. And so that really kind of leads to the next question, which is, do you think people should take nutrition as seriously as having a coach for programming? And should people be programming coaches also consider having a nutrition coach or dietitian coach? And my answer to that is very similar to the first one. It really depends on like your priority and your competitiveness and what you're trying to accomplish with the sport. Are you trying to win national titles and world titles, or are you just trying to generally have fun and do something healthy and have a hobby to be able to do it? So in general, from a general health standpoint, I think this is just an opinion. I think anyone who's spending as much time as you're going to spend in the gym powerlifting should probably care about nutrition to an extent. I mean, we all get into working out to be healthier and to improve our health. So I think there's a general standpoint that if you're going to be spending 4, 5, 6, 7 hours in the gym, you should probably in some way prioritize nutrition. With that said, it does not mean you need to be a bodybuilder, because one of the really cool things about powerlifting and why a lot of people gravitate towards it is because it doesn't have as strict nutritional demands as being a bodybuilder. That's an awesome thing about it. But too often people take that as an excuse of, oh, I can eat whatever I want and it doesn't matter. And that's not what I'm saying. Not only from the fact of that is going to affect your ability to gain strength and be competitive within certain weight classes, whatever it may be, but also, again, I come from before powerlifting coaching as a personal trainer and just wanting to promote health and fitness. I think most people should be generally healthy if they're going to be having fitness goals such as within powerlifting. So, um, at minimum, if you care to get strong and within that be healthy and do well in powerlifting, I think you should in some way probably track your food or have an idea of what you're doing. Now, some people have tracked before and they no longer need to because they're pretty consistent with what they eat. They have a general idea how many calories are in things, and they're overall consistent. They don't have to sit there on an app all the time and track all of it, even though I think that still can be beneficial. But you should have some understanding of that, because the biggest issues I see is one, people being incredibly inconsistent day to day in what they're eating. So we have these big caloric fluctuations. And then two, just eating crap, not having enough protein, bad quality source of food, all that kind of stuff. So I think there's super low hanging fruit for anyone, no matter what your level is in powerlifting and macro factor. If you haven't heard of that, it's an app like MyFitnessPal, but it's definitely a better app. And I think it's a little bit more geared to people who are a bit more serious in fitness. But it's $11.99 a month, and all you got to do is tell it what you want to do, and it spits it out and tells you exact macros and breakdowns and what to adjust and all of that. It's fantastic. It does a really, really good job. I've used it for like 3 years now. I think that's super low hanging fruit for someone who maybe isn't trying to be super competitive. Powerlifting is a hobby, but they still want to have some type of consistency with nutrition without having to pay X amount of dollars for an actual coach. I think a lot of people, majority of powerlifters, could do completely great just using macro factor. And I think most people should be doing that in some way or have used done in the past until they learn. With that said, if you're a national or world level competitor who's trying to go for placing, I'm going to say the opposite in that, well, not the opposite, but I'm going to say nutrition's underrated. Like, it's severely underrated. I think people, uh, partially because going back to the initial point, they get into the sport because there's not as like heavy of nutritional demands, and then eventually they find out, oh, I'm getting really, really strong and really competitive, but they still have these bad habits nutritionally that they never really worked on when they weren't as serious about the competition side of it, that they need to fix. Because once you get to that very high level, it's incredibly important, because when you get be at the top of a weight class, you are trying to maximize lean body mass and within that weight class as much as possible. And that means you have to be on top of nutrition, which is why I think we're seeing a lot more of that, especially on the Sheffield realm with these extreme cuts and whatnot. Because to be able to be the strongest and be this outlier in this class, especially the non heavyweight classes, you have to probably be about a bodybuilder. I mean, Waskar, for example, he is in sense too big for his class, which is a lot of people who compete at certain classes at the world stage. If he wasn't the tracker, wasn't the diet year round, he'd probably be walking around at like 68 kilos. Instead, though, he walks around at like 61 to 62 and competes at 59, and he has to basically diet year round. Sean Noriega is another great example, and I think honestly, outside of Sean's work ethic and knowledge, probably his greatest and most impressive feat is the fact from like age 15 or 16 until now, he's weighed the exact same because he's tracked his food and been serious about nutrition the entire time. Because I've seen it, I've coached people who've done it, I've seen other people that have happened to, is that you have these people who are in a weight class, they're super competitive, they're very strong. In the off season, they've let themselves get too heavy, which means they're in a surplus and a higher surplus, which is advantageous for muscle growth. Because of that, they actually gain a little too much muscle in the off season. And then when they try to diet back down, they actually struggle to get back to weight because they actually added maybe a little bit too much lean mass. And so when you're trying to like have this 1% advantage, being on point with nutrition year round is really important because it's going to help keep you sustainable within that size gain, within that weight class. So you're not getting too big and always be within reach of it. So yeah, in short, if you're just a general power lifter, 95 to 99% of people, I think yes, you should be. You may not need a coach, but you should be taking nutrition serious from just a health perspective, and also it's going to help performance. If you're national or you know, aspirations to be a national or world level competitor, you 100% should probably be taking nutrition more serious and looking at getting a coach because at this point, with how competitive things are, that 1 to 2% advantage of having someone on your team nutritionally at all times might be the difference. So, moving on to nutrition, the next question is starting from the onset of your coaching career, what were the defining moments from when I started into the present day? And so I'm taking this as the primary things that I can look back on as big turning points. Not necessarily like someone winning something, but like more so from the business side of like things that were really big that helped me get from the point of coaching one person for free to the point of what I'm doing now. So first and foremost, my 6 years I spent as a personal trainer and a fitness manager at the Gold's Gym was invaluable. That in-person experience was incredibly helpful. Personal training, helping hundreds, if not thousands, of people, and working directly with them. Because when you're a fitness manager, you get the benefit of working with a lot more people inadvertently or sometimes directly at times than just a singular trainer. So, tons of experience through that. But as well as the fitness manager side, may actually give me more experience to an extent. So, my general job as a fitness manager is one sales that has carryover to an extent, but not so much. My main carryover is I would have a team of 11 to 15 trainers at a time. And my main role was to develop those trainers and teach them. And that actually somewhat relates to powerlifting coaching a bit more because when you're teaching a person with general population, there's a lot of things that carry over, being able to understand instruction and soft skills, but you are teaching someone who doesn't know how to exercise most of the time versus with being a fitness manager and what I did there, I was teaching people who are very knowledgeable on exercise how to be even more knowledgeable. And that's usually powerlifting. Most powerlifters are not people who have never worked out in their life. They're people that actually already have a pretty good understanding of fitness and working out and training and exercise. And I'm trying to make them even better as a powerlifting coach. So my time as a fitness manager was really, really invaluable. But moving from there to when I was actually a powerlifting coach, the first big thing that I think I saw like a turning point with was when I hosted my first sanctioned USAPL meet. Prior to that, for 5 years prior to that, I was hosting some unsanctioned events, push pulls, a lot of strongman competition. Those did a lot for me, but there's a difference in hosting a sanctioned event because of the organized body of and what that means throughout not just the local area but also the state. Because in Missouri at the time, I think this was 2017 maybe, there were only two people I knew of directing meets in Missouri, and those two people were only really hosting one meet a year, and both were in St. Louis. So there was basically nothing in Springfield, there was nothing really in Columbia, there was nothing really in Kansas City. So there wasn't really many opportunities for lifters. And even though at that point USAPL was really skyrocketing, there was nothing happening in Missouri. Missouri was definitely like an untested area. It was USPA and SPF dominated. So when I hosted my first meet in Springfield, it pulled. It pulled from Kansas, it pulled from Arkansas, it pulled from Columbia, it pulled from St. Louis. A lot of people came in. And so that immediately made me a focal point of the local community by offering that because I'm now one of three people in the entire state directing meets. And I've talked in length on podcasts or videos about how much directing meets it can help you even as a powerlifting coach and just networking, which I'm going to get to as in a later question as well. The next one that I thought was a big turning point, and this is around the same time, was frankly, I coached my first strong person. That helped. I'm not going to deny the fact that once you like, there is a difference in getting results with someone who's strong than getting results with someone who's just average. People notice that, and especially I feel like where I was from in a area where it was very dominated by untested lifters. I was the weak coach who didn't look like they lifted, even at the time I was full on powerlifting training and not weak necessarily. It was a deterrent. But once I had this person that was really strong, they got 500 knots plus. They're adding 70 kilos to their total in a year, something like that. That kind of wiped that away. Once you did that rebuttal or like deterrent was gone, and that really kind of opened the doors. And because of that, I had a big influx after that of people because they saw, oh, he can actually make strong people even stronger, and that was very helpful. So the next one, it started my YouTube channel in 2020. Even before that blew up, I think I had like the first 6 months, I think I had like 300 subscribers. I was still seeing a huge ROI on that. It actually was making a pretty big difference. Um, and then as soon as when it blew up, in large part to when I started coaching Sean and the outreach that he was able to give from that, there's nothing else I've done in my career, whether powerlifting coaching or fitness managing or personal training, that had as much of a tipping point and success as the YouTube channel. There's just a different level of reach with YouTube. I mean, there's very few people who kind of make it on YouTube, and so yeah, it was huge. Just kind of putting myself out there. The next one, following with meet directing, was when I hosted Midwest Primetime, because that was definitely the most probably impactful meet I directed. People don't know that was a meet I hosted in 2020 after nationals got canceled, and I invited all of like the top lifters from our region to come compete, and kind of semi started or like at least revolutionized the idea of this like local primetime meet. It was one of the first of its kind. Not only was that somewhat beneficial and kind of somewhat starting that trend, and I think that kind of, to an extent, started increased my credibility on the business side, uh, and the ideas I had on that side. But when I met Angelo, I never met Angelo before or talked to him, and because of that, I started talking to him and joined him on Two White Lights. And I can't say enough about what Two White Lights has done in the sense of reach and the opportunities that's presented. So that was huge. Also, because of that, I ended up coaching a couple of lifters. One in particular was Autumn Green, who competed at that meet. And Autumn was a phenomenal person to work with. But she was also kind of like the first female athlete I worked with that had a little bit more reach and was that strong. And because of that, I have a lot of women that I work with now that credit the fact that they saw me coaching Autumn. They saw the relationship I had with her and how comfortable she was and how much she was like word of mouth, like promoting me, as well as the strength she was gaining. And they reached out to me because of Autumn. Uh, so yeah, Midwest Primetime was big. And then there's been a lot of other little small things, but I think kind of fast forward, the next big one was powerlifting now, for sure. That's been like the last big one that I think was a big defining moment. Not only because of the opportunities it's presented, but I mean, I spent probably from 2018 to 2022, really kind of trying to brainstorm. Okay, powerlifting coaching is awesome, but you can only make so much doing it. You can make more, but I mean, you can coach more people. There's every single dollar you make is more time you have to invest in doing it. That's not always the best ROI. Like, you want to find ways to reduce the amount of time you have to work while making more money in the long run. So I had a lot of ideas, a lot of ones that I actually thought would have been really good, but either one, it was not the right time. It wasn't something I was passionate about. And so I just kept waiting, not forcing it. And finally, I was talking to Sean one day, and we've already talked about it before on the podcast. And this is the one that really kind of clicked. It was the right idea at the right time with the right people, and it's really opened up some doors and been an awesome opportunity for us to be able to provide valuable content to the community, but also from a business end and career wise, it's allowed a great form of passive revenue where it requires a lot less work per dollar earned than coaching does. So, next one, just for time's sake, so we can make sure we get to enough questions, I'm going to kind of only answer half of this one. So, first off, maybe I'll answer all of it. So, first off, how do you personally design attempts? How do you approach it when a lifter feels top end to shortchange them? And in other words, how do you approach it when a lifter feels they can and should go heavier in competition? So I'm just going to skip ahead and answer the second two kind of, because how do you personally design attempts? I think we've done some videos on that pretty much explain all of that. But how do you approach a lifter when they feel you're shortchanging them? Like you say, oh, I think this is what your third attempt should be, and they disagree. They think they should have more. So um, in large part, I think a lot of that just comes with experience and gain respect because at this point, I don't deal with that very much, where I definitely did a lot more when I was first starting out. With that being said, I think there are some things you can do that can definitely help with that. So, uh, one, make sure well in advance they know how you plan attempts. So I was going back to the first question. I mean, generally, how I'm planning attempts is about what you squat or bench in training, or at least what we feel is your maximum potential in training, is what we're going to aim for at the meet. And then for deadlift, it's either going to be about what we feel like your maximum potential is in training, or maybe 2.5 to 5 kilos more. If I've never worked with you before into a meeting, we've never gone through like a peaking cycle. Because at this point, with how most people program, we aren't dying in fatigue. We aren't trying to super compensate. So, I mean, most of power lifters at the end of the training block or whatever it may be, or sometime in the gym, are at peak strength. That peaking is somewhat of a fallacy at this point. But really, what peaking is just taking this microcycle that we generally can be strong within, and trying to get all these days now, all these lifts to be strongest on one day versus on differing days. Or obviously, some people just do the SBD days. I shouldn't say on different days to one day. It's also the right week as well. Like having your week 5 Saturday, everything line up on that day when usually it doesn't to be the strongest. That's really what peaking is at this point. So, one, making sure well in advance they understand what we're trying to do. So they understand that when we see this max potential in the gym, that is the goal. They should know that before we even get to that point, not afterwards when I'm sending them attempts and now having to explain it. Next, I'm going to let them know that, especially this is the first meet, because it's usually what's going to happen more often than not, is let them know that when we gather more data to tell us otherwise, we will adjust from there. Maybe we find out your squat peaks like crazy and we get way more than we imagined. Okay, in the future, we can start to adjust for that. But leading to the next point, we have to have safety nets. And this is maybe the most important point to get across to people is when I'm setting attempts, I'm explaining to them that we're trying to allow the opportunity on the day to have the best potential day, but also have safety nets in case it's the worst potential day, so that we actually don't have the worst potential. We can have these safety nets to keep us from that. Because when lifters are thinking, "Oh, I'm getting shortchanged. Oh, I should be able to do more," they're only thinking about the spectrum of it's a perfect day, which we all know that doesn't happen very often, especially for all three lifts to be perfect on the day and have your super meet. So there's the other end of the spectrum that we can have the worst day possible, and no matter who you are, no matter what lift, no matter what coach, you're going to have some of those happen. You're not going to have every meet go as you plan. So when we're planning attempts, we're trying to be able to create the safety net so that we can be able to adjust within that spectrum, so that we can be able to adjust if the day's going even better than planned, and we can be able to adjust even if the day's going worse than planned. So usually when I'm actually planning attempts, I'm taking what I think is the third attempt and planning backwards for seconds and openers. But come meet day, we're going the opposite. We're now going, here's your opener, and then we're going from there. We're seeing how that opener moves. Is it moving as expected? Okay, awesome. We go to the plan second. Does that move as expected? Okay, we go to the plan third. But what I mean by going the opposite from the original planning is if that opener doesn't move well, we have this safety net. I think something maybe I do a little bit different than others sometimes is I always have a range for second attempts as well, because I want the opportunity to go lower or higher as well. I don't. I think sometimes you can run into an issue, and this goes back to what we're talking about here, that you take always the plan second instead of having an adjustment if things are just not doing as well. Maybe you cut too much, maybe you didn't peak well, maybe there's other variables aligning that stricter commands and you're having to adjust technique to be able to abide by those. I want to have a safety net. And so that's the biggest thing, and making sure that people understand that we're not just planning for the scenario of the perfect day and the super meet. We're also planning for the day that things just don't go our way, and we need to make attempts that are going to line up with both. So, next question. As a coach, what are the main reasons you drop an athlete, or why have you dropped athletes in the past? And how do you recommend younger coaches professionally approach severing ties with an athlete? So, pretty simply put, I think I think we talked about this on the podcast on your initial consult call. Set up the expectations of exactly what you expect from the athlete, and then they should be telling you what they expect from you, as well as you telling them what you are going to be doing, your communication protocol, when they're going to be getting things, and both of you should be doing that. If the coach is doing it, the athlete should be doing it. If the athlete's doing it, the coach should be doing it. The expectations are met, because that's usually where things go bad. The athlete fires a coach because they're not meeting the expectations. A coach fires an athlete because the athlete isn't meeting the expectations. So they just need to be clear. Um, Something that's interesting though, and I actually hadn't thought about this a lot, and maybe it'll be a topic we do for a Power Up Now podcast in the future, is Bryce Lewis had posted some stories recently, and this is kind of obvious, but it was very interesting at the same time, because like I said, I just hadn't thought about it, is unlike most sports, in this scenario, the athlete has all the power. Because like if we're talking extremes of NFL, NBA, even like college football, high school, uh, the coach has all the power. The athlete doesn't, or the athlete isn't paying the coach, and it's more so the team or the coach presenting an opportunity. The coach has all the power, and it's kind of an odd dynamic because, frankly, to be an effective coach, you have to be in the power role. Yet at the same time, within powerlifting coaching, you are not in the power role because the athlete has all control over if they're going to continue paying you. So it's a kind of a little bit of a weird dynamic. But that's where, as long as we can both meet together and understand expectations, that's the best case scenario. So, as for criteria for why you should drop someone, I didn't want to necessarily go through like exact reasons I dropped out for people because I think that should be based on your own expectations and your own personal opinion and where you're at because it's going to be differing based on a lot of different things. But in short, I think it always comes down to not meeting expectations of an athlete and differing from their actual goals. I think probably the most frustrating thing for a coach is when this athlete says they want to do X, Y, and Z, and these are their goals, but their effort, communication, and whatever it may be, do not match that at all. They say, I want to PR, I want to win national titles, I want to do X, Y, and Z, yet you can barely get them to communicate. They won't send you videos, they overshoot all the time, they eat like crap. Their effort and what they're putting in does not affect or does not match what their goals are because I get this a lot. I'm sure any coach in a similar scenario as me and Matt, Marcellus, and Sean to an extent is that we only coach elite level lifters. We don't coach anyone just who's just an average lifter who doesn't isn't trying to be super competitive. I definitely have people who just kind of do this for hobby. I have at least three people right now who do not compete and will probably never compete. They just do this to have fun and they just like the element of squat, bench, and deadlift. And I coach them. I treat them differently because of their goals than I would my people vying for national or world titles. Until those people who want national world titles tell me that they don't want to do that anymore and that they have differing goals, I'm going to treat them like they need to be like needs to happen for them to reach those goals versus the people that tell me differing things that, oh, I just want to be healthy. If I PR, I PR, but generally I just want to squat, bench, and deadlift and make sure I don't get hurt and just have fun doing it and enjoy it. And I just need someone to kind of keep me accountable. Cool. I'm going to treat you exactly like that. So the expectations and the goals have to match. So, um, the one example I'll give, and this is more for people kind of more starting out who kind of struggle with the idea of firing someone because it's just uncomfortable, as well as frankly when you're first starting out, it's money. Every athlete is a paycheck for you, and it can be somewhat frightening because you if you fire this person, you do not know if you're going to be able to replace them, and that's the issue. If you fire two athletes, both paying you $150, that's $300 a month, which is significant and you don't know if or when you can replace them with someone else. Because sometimes you put up with stuff more than you should. What I'll say to that, because I'm a numbers guy and I always come up with these hypothetical situations, maybe they're a little exaggerated, but I still like them, so I'm going to go with it. Let's say you have an athlete who's constantly causing you stress. This is the athlete that causes you the combined stress of what your other 10 athletes cause you. We all have this. We all have this athlete that, like, because of them, literally, it feels like they take up half of your time or at least half of your frustration. Um, and so let's say you wake up on a Wednesday and you got a message from them and you're already kind of, oh my gosh, what is this going to be this time? And they overshot. They did X, Y, they did it again. The same thing again where they're not listening and they're frustrating you. And then that is going to leak into the rest of the day. For the rest of the day, you're going to have this kind of mood of frustration because of this person. And let's just say because of that, you are not very productive on the day. That's happened to me plenty. I think anyone who coaches would be open to admitting that. I think everyone's dealt with that. You get this person frustrates you, and you're less productive on the day. Let's say you lose 3 or 4 hours of productive work because you got your baseline work done. But as an entrepreneur and a small business owner, there's a lot of things you have to do outside of just the normal demands. Like if you want to grow your business, there's a lot more you got to do. And this day, this person frustrated you so much that you could not get the motivation to do that extra stuff that will help build your business. So let's say this person is paying you $150 a month. Then let's say if you were, let's say, a personal trainer, maybe you're just doing a consult call, you charge $50 an hour. So you consider an hour of your time worth $50. So if this person now wasted 4 hours of your day because of the frustration and the stress of it, and you weren't able to be productive, you in sense wasted $200 because $50 an hour, $200, 4 hours, so on and so forth. What I'm getting to, maybe this is a bit of a stretch, is how many times the athletes are actually costing you money. It's not actual physical money, but that was time that you could have been doing other things to build your business in the long term, increase the long term potential. You see the short term $150, but you don't see the long term, possibly thousands of dollars of all the lost time every week, every month because of this singular athlete causing so much frustration that it's really just ruining your day each time. So, and it gets to that point, drop them. It's not worth the extra $150 because there are other things you could be doing with your time that are going to eventually make you a lot more money in the long term. So, last couple of questions, and then we'll open it up to if you're having any questions, make sure to add them. I don't know, maybe I'm missing them. Let's see. Okay, we got a couple in here. I'm in the wrong spot here, but yeah, make sure to be tossing in questions if you have some, and I will get to those after I'm done with the next couple. So, what do you think the next trend in powerlifting will be? So, one, if I knew, I probably would be doing it. I think it's always hard to kind of gauge what the next trend will be. But with that said, something I think we're already saying that I think is going to continue to become more and more important is you have to have a solid background in injury management. I already mentioned this in a Q&A recently on YouTube. I know Sean's mentioned this. We all mentioned it for a while. But at this point, if you don't have a solid background in injury management, you're behind the game. It used to be where a lot of coaches they did out a program and they didn't have that much of a, at this point you have to. Like I think it's gotten to the point now where any really good coach has enough of a background in understanding injury management that it's kind of a staple of what you need. And when I'm getting to the next big trend in powerlifting that I think we're already seeing, and it's elevating the importance of it, elevating the importance of this idea of having a solid background in injury management. Is that, I mean, there's more than this, but the three coaches I can think of in the last 1 to 2 years that really kind of went from like the local level scene to really prominence, especially over the last year. John Song, Keenan Dung, and Devraj Roy. Sorry, I always want to say Devraj Roy, who's on powerlifting now. They're all DPTs. They're excellent coaches, but that background in injury management 100% has helped to elevate them because of if you're powerlifting, you're going to get hurt. And it's beneficial to have a coach who has a really strong background in it. We've already seen this before. We saw in 2018-ish the big shift where all the people who were dying from the DUP, we saw this next wave of coaches understand a little bit better about workload management, and people leave the DUP coaches for these coaches to better understand workload management. In 2020, we saw a big PRI movement rush. 2021, 2022, we saw the opposite, which is, oh, I hate PRI, so let's really talk about workload management and that kind of stuff, and a lot more like load management strategies. Like I said, now we're seeing, because of powerlifting coaching being a more viable option money wise, we're seeing people who were going to be physical therapists wanting the powerlifting coach. I mean, probably 5 years ago that wouldn't happen because why would you go through a 6 year degree to now charge $100 a month, which you're not going to do? But now they can actually charge a rate that can be comparable to what they might be able to make hourly as a physical therapist. It's enticing for them to be a powerlifting coach. And so I think we're seeing a really big trend in how people are wanting to go to those types of coaches. With that said, does that mean you need to be a doctor of physical therapy? No, but you better have a solid foundation in injury and rehab and all that kind of stuff, which is very, very doable. Because frankly, I'm speaking for some physical therapists, and I think they agree because I've talked to enough. Most of what a lot of the people who specialize in physical therapy for powerlifters have learned is not from their actual coursework. Very little of the actual coursework with most physical therapy programs are going to teach you about how to work with a powerlifter during compound movements. It's sorry, I'm lagging a little bit. I don't know if it's still working. Um, Very little of the coursework is actually teaching you much about actual how to work with powerlifters or how to work with high performing athletes. A lot of that stuff is things they learned post education, which that's the same with me. I mean, someone who has a master's of marketing, exact same thing. Probably 90% of what I understand and utilize from post learning education. So if those DPTs can learn all of that outside of it and become like specialists with powerlifters. It means that information is readily available for everyone. But the difference is because that's what their niche is and what they're focused on, they have a lot more priority and spend a lot more time trying to learn that, which is why they become experts in it because that's their job. They want to be the foremost experts in it. Where maybe if you're just a powerlifting coach, that's not the first thing you think of. You think about programming and technique and that kind of stuff. You kind of ignore the fact that injury management is a massive aspect of it. So I think anyone, for the most part, can learn it if they put the time in. The only place where a physical therapist is going to have a leg up is one, the credentials, things they are can do that are with inside their scope that might be outside of a powerlifting coach's scope, or two, active experience. I mean, if you specifically not only coach powerlifters but also have like consulting or rehab type services, you're just going to be able to work with more people who are going through these and gain more experience and more tools in your toolbox. And that's one of the reasons I work with John Sallin a lot. I think I have a decent background in injury management, but there are a lot of times where even though I think I can get someone to the point I need them to be, John, I think, can get them there a bit quicker, and I would be somewhat doing a disservice to my athlete if I know there's an option that can get them healthier quicker because someone else specializes in a greater extent than I am. So that's where a lot of times I refer to John because I know that if it takes me 2 months, maybe it takes him a month to a month and a half because he just gets more experience working with these situations and has more ideas of what he needs to do. And I want to get my person healthy. So, okay. Next question. How to best manage a lifter who overly fatigues when passing a certain threshold, even if the RPE is reasonable? So this is kind of talking more about like loading, like they are hitting a certain load, no matter exertion, it's really, really heavy and it taxes them. So there could be a couple possible answers to this, and there's likely more nuance with each individual scenario. And at least with this question, I don't know the threshold we're kind of looking at. But let's just use the example of 200 kilos for a single at 8 RPE is this lifter's threshold. Anytime they go above that, even if it's easier than 8 RPE, now it's like they do 205 and it's 7.5, whatever it is. It just beats them up, and we see that. I've seen that often. I'm sure anyone who coaches has seen that often. A couple possible solutions for this. One, if you go to our back to our podcast a couple of months ago, the one we did on the things we may be wrong about. I think it was during Sean's talk on periodization. Um, Marcellus had brought up how he goes about his current squat program because he has this issue. He has this issue that he cannot hit these certain load thresholds without overly fatiguing. And what we kind of talked about there, they're all kind of similar concepts, like the fatigue single concept that I like the idea that I presented in that video, or Sean's variable top set video that he presented, uh, and then what I'm going to talk about. They're all trying to find similar solutions. How can we be able to hit these exertion levels without being overly fatigued? So, if you didn't listen to that podcast, Marcellus, how he sets up his programming is block one, 4 week block because rep scheme is 5-5-4-4. Block two is 4-4-3-3, and then block three is 3-3-2-1. Each block follows a 6, 7, 7 to 8, 9 RPE progression. Because for him, if he was just to do a whole block of singles he found or a whole block of doubles, he gets overly beat up. So he kind of does this like it's not like we often think of like block one is fives, block two is fours, block three is threes, or what 3-2-1, 5-4-3, whatever it may be. He's literally doing that throughout. He's going from fives to ones throughout 3 blocks: 5-5-4-4, 4-4-3-3, 3-3-2-1. Because he can't handle those load thresholds as often, he needs to start out the block a little bit lighter, uh, absolute load wise, but keep the exertion up. So it's better for him to start at a triple at a 6 than it is a single at a 6. The load is just heavier. So maybe a simpler way, because I shouldn't say that's not simple, but another way to do it, and maybe a little bit simpler that I've used, is let's just use the example. Maybe you run a block of fives, a block of fours, and a block of threes. And you know, if you do a block of singles, either one, for a reason of like the stimulus and you need the rep work stimulus, or two, just the load threshold. It's just too heavy to start and too heavy to end and beat you up too quick. A simple thing you can do, let's say you know fives, fours, and threes work really, really well. Run that, and then just at the end of the block of threes on that week 4, do a single. It's basically what Marcellus was doing. He could do fives, fours, threes, and then just do a single at the end, but he was just periodizing a bit more within the block of doing 5-5-4-4 and so on and so forth. But you could just keep the rep scheme static per block And then the last week in that final block in the macro cycle, do that single and test and hit that load threshold, knowing that that's the one time you're going to be able to push that. There's some caveats within that. Like I said, there's nuance that goes in this. I mean, for maybe a lifter who just is never really has hit maxes, or a newer lifter that's going to be a little anxious to all of a sudden do a single. There's things there, but in general, that can be something that can be beneficial. Another way is just a delayed ramp up. Maybe you're doing, I mean, Marcellus is even doing this to what I explained. But let's say you usually do 6, 7, 8, 9 RPE or RPE cap or whatever it may be. Delay it a bit, knowing that once you get to this threshold, is going to be a bit too much. And so maybe you're going to do 5, 6, 7 and jump to 9, just make a big jump into the week 4. I do that very often with a lot of my deadlifters in particular, partially because sometimes deadlifts is a bit more inherently fatiguing, but also partially because of the interplay between squat and deadlift. It's sometimes hard for both of them to want to work together, so it's not uncommon for me to have someone just make a big jump on the final week of deadlift and kind of delay that ramp up a little bit. And then the last thing I'll say is this can be a combination of all of this. I'm sure Marcellus does with the spot program he was talking about. It's just the addition of the idea of back and deloading, because really this type of lifter you're talking about is what that kind of idea spurred from the initial podcast we did a year and a half ago, or whatever it was, is this idea, this lifter who gets disproportionately fatigued. One, that load threshold, but two, I think a lot of times it's not just the load threshold of that top set, it ends up being what it then does to all the back offsets. Because that top set gives them this very like high acute fatigue, we then see these back offsets that should have been submaximal all of a sudden become a lot harder than they normally would. And then because they're a lot harder than they normally would, the entire workout becomes much more fatiguing. It really kind of puts this in the tanks them and puts them in this fatigue debt. And so the idea of back and deloading, where you hit that top set, you end up really doing a strong pullback on the back offsets and the accessory work for that day, can kind of help someone be able to handle that threshold a little bit more. So next question. How do you determine your knowledge gaps as a coach? Because it can be hard to know where to improve. So two main ways that I go about that. The first one is just experience and running into issues that you do not have the answer to. And this is something I kind of covered on Two White Lights. I did a roundtable with Natalie and Solana. And something I mentioned there that probably a lot of people don't agree with, and I'm exaggerating when I say this. I said in that episode, imposter syndrome wasn't real. And what I mean by that is imposter syndrome usually comes down to you not feeling in control of something, or you not feeling like you have the answer to something. But how you respond to that dictates everything. If you run into an issue with an athlete and you think your immediate reaction is, uh, I don't feel worthy, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm not good at this, you succumb to imposter syndrome. The opposite in the spectrum is where you can learn and where you gain experience is you say, oh, I realize this is something that I don't have the answer to, and kind of think, awesome, here's my knowledge gap. It just presented itself to me. I can shift and say, I'm not worthy, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm not good enough. Or I can say, oh, here's my knowledge gap. I know exactly what I need to go learn about. And then from there, go do what you need to do to go learn more about that, whether there's information online, whether you're going to talk to like a network of other coaches, whatever you're going to do to be able to learn more about that. And it's a mindset of how you go about that. So I said imposter syndrome isn't real. It is real, but I do think it's a mindset choice. You can either look at it as, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm not worthy, or you can look at it as, oh, here's my knowledge gaps. Awesome. I know exactly what I need to learn more about now. The second big way, again, this is just me. Other people are different. Making content. I said it plenty, but like I learn way more from making the content for Powerlifting Now and YouTube than probably the people watching it. And the reason why is because if if I'm going to put something out to educate someone, it's actually going to be good, because obviously there's a lot of terrible content. But if it's going to be good and people are going to want to watch it, and people are going to learn, it means I had to be somewhat of an expert to be able to educate people in the first place. And the fact is, probably a lot of people watch these videos and think we just know all this stuff and we're experts in all of it. I have so many things that I have ideas about that I want to do, and when I go to try and make a video on it or whatnot, I realize I don't know enough to educate people. I might be knowledgeable, but I'm not an expert. Like I'm not good enough yet to be able to actually educate people on this topic. Like I've got to learn more, and that happens a lot. There's a lot of videos I make where I spend a year or two just kind of like here and there learning a little bit more, picking up pieces and starting to develop ideas, so I can eventually educate people on it. That's where I feel knowledge gap. I have these ideas for content. I'll go to try and make it. I'll realize I don't know enough. Boom, I know where I need to learn more. So All right, last question. I'm realizing 9 questions might almost fill up an entire hour, so hopefully I'll answer a couple after that, but, we'll probably cut down on how many, predetermined questions we have in the future so we can feel a little bit more live as well. So, um, how can you attract more clients in the coaching field without having extensive credentials or connections, especially when starting out? So, covering both of these, first starting with credentials is I don't think you need to have extensive credentials. Um, and arguably, most people do not. Meaning, like I'm using credentials as like having a master's degree in like kinesiology or something like that. Because one, uh, eh, once you show results within powerlifting specifically, most people don't care about your actual credentials and your background and stuff like that. Seemingly the only people that care are the ones that kind of put too much emphasis on the degree in the first place. But outside of that, people don't care. Just use the example of the four of us. Me, Matt, Sean, and Marcellus. Only Marcellus has any type of like formal education in exercise science. He has a bachelor's degree, I think, in kinesiology. Meanwhile, Matt doesn't have a college degree. I have a master's in business administration, and Sean, I believe, was mechanical engineering. I might be wrong on that engineering though. It's engineering. I believe it's mechanical. But if anything, you can almost argue that the business degree, with the weaknesses a lot of folks have, might be the most beneficial. But the thing is, and this is coming from someone who has a master's degree in business administration. I've already mentioned this. Probably 90% plus of what I learned was my own reading, not what I learned in my degree. Um, uh, and I think the same thing goes for a lot of, especially powerlifting and exercise science. Almost everything that I know, or most of us know, is readily available. Even what's in these college programs. The only I think of maybe two classes I learned in like my collegiate 5.5 years that I learned stuff that I couldn't have learned on my own. And the reason why is because it was a specific professor who was just a genius, who learning from them directly was invaluable, and I could not get that otherwise. Otherwise, yeah, I think credentials tend to get overrated, and it's only a certain subset of people that tend to put a lot on that. So outside of that, credentials, I don't think matter as much. I don't think you have that. You can get around that. What you can't get around, because you mentioned this, how do you get into the coaching field without extensive connections? I don't think you can get into it without extensive connections. And so, what I mean by this, because this is going to be a major chunk of the two-part series I'm going to have on how to establish yourself as a local coach that should be coming out in sometime this year. Um, with connections, I'm not meaning like, oh, you're a really strong lifter, so you already have a following, or maybe you lucked out and your first athlete was super strong. That's not what I'm even meaning by connections. What I'm meaning by connections is networking, and anyone can network. But unfortunately, maybe this is me being older and grumpy. I think it's a little bit of a lost skill. We've gotten so used to being behind a phone and a computer that we aren't comfortable being in person. But the fact of the matter is, when you're first starting out and you want to be, I mean, because as a powerlifting coach, you are an entrepreneur and a small business owner. You got to separate the two. There's being a powerlifting coach, which is super cool. Oh, I get to program for people and make them strong. But then there's the other side, that you have to run a small business, that the same requirements, regardless of whatever business you decide to start, are going to be needed. You're going to need to network. You're going to need to do stuff. That's going to be in person. So who sh- uh, the video that's going to come out is going to talk a lot about this a lot more. So I'll just briefly cover this. Who should you network with, and what is networking? So, on a local level, that's where you're starting out. Meet directors, other coaches who are prominent, and then gym owners. Those are the leaders in your community. I already talked about as meet directing what that did for me. They're the leaders in the community, and when you can network them, you can be seen with them. You provide value for them, and now they're spreading positive word of mouth. Their word of mouth means more than anyone. Everyone's already looking up to them as these leaders within the community that everyone knows. They all know the meet director who holds the really good USAPL meet. They know the two coaches who coach most of the people in these gyms. They know the gym owner. These are the people that everyone knows. And when you be able to network and form connections with them, it can be invaluable to getting you connected with everyone. And so, how do you network with people? It's simple yet hard. Is you provide value for them, aka you probably do something for them. So, just some general ideas. I cover this a lot more in the video. Is meet directors volunteer at their meets? Go volunteer. Go spot and load. You have no idea how much that's going to like put you in their your braces. You provided value for them uh, by doing something that is very difficult for them to find people to do. They're going to want to owe you back and provide good word of mouth in some way. If there's a local coach around who's kind of like the main local coach, and you look up to them, offer to take them out to lunch, pay for it. Say, hey, I want to pay for your lunch, and in return, I just want to be able to sit down and pick your brain for an hour and be able to ask you questions and learn from you. I think I've had a couple of people do that, and I always say yes. I'd be happy to do that. You want to give me a free lunch? Yeah, I'll go sit and talk to you for an hour about anything you want to know. And then guess what? You get to know them. You network with them. People see you around them. You go ask to help them out, and maybe handle some of their like be a co-handler at meets with them. Uh, it brings in more opportunities, especially maybe if they're full, they'll start referring people to you. And the last one's helping out gym owners. Maybe they got an event going on, volunteers. Again, offer them value by doing stuff for them, in short. And it's incredibly simple on paper, kind of like finance and nutrition. Incredibly simple on paper, but much harder in actual application. You got to go do stuff. It's uncomfortable sometimes. I'm an introvert. A lot of times, it's not helpful for me to be like going and talking to people and putting myself out there. I think probably most people would identify more on the extrovert versus the extrovert spectrum, but uh, it's also not that hard. I don't have to talk to anyone volunteering at a meet. If I'm one on one with a coach talking about powerlifting, cool. I love talking about powerlifting. If I'm offering to help at an event for a gym owner, I mean, it's so easy to offer value to these people and network. And what that does in the long term for you is just invaluable. So, um, all right. Well, that concludes the preset questions. So let me check. I have to look where all these kind of pop up since this is new for me. So, Marshall, thank you for Midwest Primetime. May have been the most influential local meet in USAPL history. Fact is, looking back on it, it actually wasn't. I mean, it was a cool meet, but like, yeah, Marshall took it. Marshall and Mark took it to a completely other level with what they did. So yeah, I had a cool idea, but their execution was way better. So questions in here. Uh, Armando, equipped approaches. Unfortunately, I am definitely the wrong person to ask, and I would be doing a disservice to be answering that question because I have never worked with equipped lifters. I have zero experience in all of it. So yes, that might be something in the future where I don't know how many people. If we have enough, maybe let us know if we can get a guest on talking about equipped lifting. But I'm not sure how much of the audience we have is on the equip side. But yes, unfortunately, I'm just not a good person to answer that. So, uh, have you seen deep glute persistent pain? I've seen a lot of it lately. How to manage it? Uh, yeah, that's a pretty normal injury. I mean, every sport you have pretty similar injuries. If you play soccer versus football versus swimming versus whatever it is, powerlifting, we same overuse injuries. We see ones that are really, really common in powerlifting. We get a lot of low back stuff. We get a lot of adductor stuff, a lot of knee stuff, a lot of glute stuff. Um, the issue is deep glute persistent pain is hard for me to sit here and say, oh, this is exactly what it is. This is what you should do. Um, so I'm going to shy away from fully answering that question because I don't want to do a disservice because that's a bit too much nuance to be able to say, oh, just deep glute pain, do X, Y, and Z. Yeah, I mean, it's always the same. Three things you should probably look into is workload and how is that affecting things. Are you seeing any type of like uh, correlation to workload or intensities that are kind of or a certain movement that is pushing that pain further? Is there some significant technique issue where you are overloading at one side versus the other, which is causing a workload related issue where one side is having structurally different demands than the other side? And then the last one is what are you doing outside the gym? Is recovery on point to be able to necessitate what you're doing inside the gym? So I know that probably doesn't answer the direct question because, like I said, it's a bit hard to answer, but that's really where you need to start with those 3 points with pretty much every injury. So next one, how do you approach an intro block with a new client that has been doing an unsustainable amount of volume? How do you work out how much you should pull back? Um, Probably the best answer I give is there are plenty of athletes that I have coached, maybe even more than not, that the training they did before was not something that I was going to take much from. There might be some information, but it was something like, okay, I just got to overhaul this because this isn't really very close at all to what I do. I don't agree with it. It's way too much, whatever it may be. Um, in those instances, you're kind of relying on your heuristics of like general templates per se, which we've talked about on some of the podcasts. So you have X lifter who has this type of leverages for each lift. They're in this week's class. They're male or female. And you start to just kind of look, oh, their squat is, I think, is very, very similar strength wise and kind of like pattern wise to this lifter I have. Their bench is like this. And you start to just kind of get a starting point based on experience. That's really the best answer. And if you don't have experience, it's start conservative. Like have a general idea where you're going to start most people because always, almost always, I'd rather start conservative with someone and add more than start too aggressive, especially if I don't have much info. The less info I have, the more I'm starting conservative, the more I'm probably not really going to push too much in the first block. I usually tell most people, like when I write my first block for someone, it's usually 4 weeks, and I write it really conservative. I write it with the thought that if it goes well, we're probably going a fifth week or a sixth week, maybe even a seventh. I'm writing it very conservative. I want to see the patterns and what happens throughout these weeks. How are they recovering? How are they handling these lows? How are they adapting and progressing? I'd much rather add more later through the block than find out 2 weeks and, oh crap, this is way too much. This is way too heavy. It's way too much volume. So that's the best thing I'd say. One, find examples from experience that you think would be a good starting point based on some similarities you see. And then two, start extra conservative and write something that you very much assume you likely are going to add to or build upon in that intro block until you get to a point where you're like, okay, this is a good stopping point for the block. I've got some good information now how to develop the next block. So um, we'll do. We got two more, so I'll do last two questions here. What are your thoughts on periodizing accessories through the mesocycle versus the more linear, non-periodized approach? Um, I assume you mean like for instance, I usually tend to just be static with like the rep schemes and all the stuff that I put for accessories versus being more periodized with it. Um, I the reason I am more static with how I do accessories is one, I'm more often changing rep schemes. And then two, they're typically a bit more novel, especially if I'm rotating accessories over after a couple blocks. And so you're naturally, most of the time, if you're changing rep schemes on a consistent basis block to block, and you're cycling them in and out, barring some of them maybe like standardized, like a belt squat or a weighted dip, you're like, I always got to keep this in. Uh, for those, there's just going to be natural progression. There's a skill component. There's just a general adaptation and strength component. Most of the time, they're naturally going to be able to progress that through a block. And I usually tell even with that most people start a little conservative and then just plan to progress each week, regardless, until you feel like you kind of hit a wall and you feel like, okay, this is a point where I just can't keep pushing this each week. So what I'm saying is for the accessories that are maybe a little less more non-specific, the rep ranges are changing pretty consistently, and you're changing the exercise on a frequent basis. I think just being a little just like static with it is completely fine because there's going to be natural progression built in. If you are having something that is a bit more like of a mainstay, like I said, a belt squat that you just always have to leave it in because it's vital for their squat or their deadlift or weighted, whatever it is. That's something that probably once they reach a certain threshold where it's like, okay, they can't like add any more strength to this, like on like this like newbie gains type thing when you first start doing a new movement. Like it's just like squat bench and deadlift. You can't just keep adding more and more. That's where I probably, especially if you're seeing some carryover fatigue wise, is start to actually periodize that a bit more, where you may actually like do some type of progressive RPE approach, or actually like tapering. Like I very frequently on those like mainstay heavier accessories will somewhat taper them sometimes in that week forward, knowing that they're so strong at this movement. Let's say weighted dips, and they can weighted dip 180 pounds. It's fatiguing and I might even pull that back on that final week of the block, knowing that like we actually want to dissipate some of that fatigue from the accessory work. So I think it just kind of depends on the accessory option. All right. Last question: how do you determine an athlete's back down scheme on squat and deadlift, and how do you determine their workload capacity is increasing? Um, I mean, I think a lot of it. If you're talking, I'm not sure what you mean by back down scheme. If you're meaning like the repetitions, if you're meaning the exercise selection, or you're meaning the like the percent back down. But a lot of it goes from, again, experience. I've got XYZ lifter that I think is similar, or maybe I'm looking at their past training and seeing their general workload and average intensities and having a general starting point. I think probably here's an easier one to be able to explain it that I think would probably answer the question better. Is if you do not know and you are really questioning, is this the right back down scheme? That's where I like those fatigue drop sets, which really I took that idea from Mike T. He had a fatigue stop You can look into that if you want to. It's a little different, but I have a fatigue drop set. And actually, if you, a recent podcast, Pavel, Agathis coach, was on Mike T Reactive Systems, and he talked about, which I've done before in the past and I don't do currently, is actually auto-regulated fatigue stop sets. Uh, so the two options here, fatigue drops or fatigue stop sets. So fatigue drops, and what I do is I tend to, like, let's say you have a top set, and then I'm going to have someone back down 6%, and they're going to have four total sets at that possible weight, unless they hit a certain RPE designation. So I might say do four total sets of the 6% drop, but if you hit a 7 RPE, I then want you to drop an additional 6% for the rest of the sets. And so maybe they get two sets at the first 6% drop, and then two sets at the next 6% drop. Or they get all four sets at the first 6% drop. That will kind of help me figure it out. You might find that they're getting all four sets every single time and not hitting that fatigue stop. So therefore, awesome. They can handle a higher average intensity. Maybe they're still feeling recovered. You can add even a little bit more workload. Or maybe you're finding that they're always just doing one set because they need more of a drop. And you're like, okay, I just need to program a bigger percent drop in the first place. Or what Pavel did, and I'll explain why I don't do this currently, and he actually mentioned in his podcast exactly what I ran into, is you could also do an auto-regulated back offset volume, is that you say, keep doing sets at this weight, this load, until you hit a certain RPE. So there is no prescribed amount of sets. It doesn't say two sets, three sets. It just says do as many sets as you can at this weight until you hit X RPE. In a lot of cases, that can work really well and kind of auto-regulate how many sets they should be doing. But just like he had said on the podcast, I had this one time. I had someone come back to me. This was way back before I even powerlifting coach. This was just a guy, general fitness in the gym that I wrote a program for. I wrote this for him. He's like, dude, you freaking killed me. I got 16 sets. And I'm like, oh, that's not what I meant that to do. I thought like maximum of 5 sets, but yeah, you got that many sets. That's not working for me. So I think that's a possibility too. But the thing I would do differently if I was to utilize that again is I would not only I would put a maximum amount of sets. Like I'd say, do as many sets until you hit X RPE with a maximum 5 number of sets, so that it's not infinite. So, but all right. I hope everyone enjoyed that. If you have any other questions or anything from this podcast or not podcast live stream that you have additional want additional information on, make sure to head over to Discord. We'd be happy to answer that. But until next time, peace.